Steve Harris from Iron Maiden and British Lion. You listen to Andrew McCasebid from Scars and Guitars.
G'day everybody, welcome to the show. I'm very pleased to bring you a conversation with the great Andy Cichon, the bloke from Adelaide who's done it all. These days he plays bass in Billy Joel's band. His resume is unlike any other from an Australian musician in that it features Shania Twain, James Reyne, Darryl Braithwaite, Tony Bennett, Rose Tattoo, Pete Wells, and many, many more. Another aspect of Andy's career is his own band, Judge Mercy, from the early 1990s. That's where I first heard him playing guitar. He's a bass player these days, but he certainly can play guitar, as you'll hear if you listen to the Judge Mercy material. So the conversation absolutely is an opportunity to discuss Andy's journey from the suburbs of Adelaide to the bigger stages of the world, but it's also great to get some insight on what happened with Judge Mercy. I really enjoyed this chat, so here he is, Andy Cichon.
What are you doing, Lee? Showing off the guitar collection back there?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's a bass player.
Yeah, I'm a bassist. I'm a bassist who plays guitar because I have to, but that's not the other way around. I'm a career bassist, mate. So I play covers every weekend and play plenty of Billy stuff and a lot of Shania too, I've got to say. But I play Status. I don't know whether you've heard of the English company Status.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were huge back in the 80s too. I think not Mark King. Who used to play a Status? Someone I used to follow.
You're right, Mark King. That's the guy.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. and then he moved to I think he's gone to WOW now, hasn't he? WAL.
Well, he was with JD, I think. Well, I don't know whether anybody's actually with JD, but he played JD, and then I think he had WAL, and then he.
Dude, I gotta show you something because it's like it was one of the first things. So you were a fan of his?
Big time, yeah.
So what was it? What was the
Lessons in Love? Or it's not quite coming through. I think it's on voice isolation mode, so it's the.
Hang on. I gotta because it was like, dude, I studied that guy when it was all about slapping, and of course, I haven't been paid to do that since about 1988. But when I was sitting in my bedroom back in Adelaide, it was all about. That's when I was really shedding, and it was Stanley Clarke and
Larry Graham, mate, all those players.
Can you hear that?
Oh no, I think the computer's on voice, like on your side. You know how the mic on Apple's goes to voice isolation mode and turns off the background noise.
Hang on, let's see if you can. Okay, don't matter. That's a shame because it was like a real. That still doesn't work.
I can't hear it. No, I can hear aspects of it, but it's just cutting it out. Unfortunately,
no problem. It was just like that King was a huge. When I was doing that stuff, was a huge influence on me.
Oh, I think all serious bass players. I mean, you're about the most serious bass player. You and Steve Harris and Mark King, and there's a few up the top there. But I think any serious bass player who's really
Dude, to even include me with those two names is ridiculous. So let's just forget about all that shit, okay? That's another level,
Well, it's been a heck of a year for me on that front because I am a musician, but I approach these interactions as conversations first and foremost. But I actually met Steve Harris twice this last 12 months. It was only recently when he came through town, through Brisbane, and he's a heck of a guy too, man. It's like talking to your uncle. Because he's what, 50, 65, 66 these days. But and it was clear to me he doesn't do a lot of interviews either because his tone and manner is very much like you just meet someone in a coffee shop. I've been on this cycle now where I've been interviewing people for about 8 years or so. So I've done over 1,000 of them now. And usually there's a bit of an interaction that happens. And I noticed with these guys like Steve, and I've only interviewed a couple of these guys that are up the very, upper echelon. Peter Criss, for example, but there's like they are just completely, when I say normal, there's no interview manner. They're just like someone that you met, as I say, in a coffee shop or you sat next to in an aeroplane. So you're able to ask questions and draw information out of them that otherwise I think would be slightly hidden. But I wanted to give you that compliment anyway, Andy, because like I said in the interactions, I know I'm taking things down a bit of a different track, but work with me here. It's
Yeah, sure.
it's I think it's really important you get feedback and that you understand that you really are a byword for what's possible as a musician in Australia. If you work hard and, you woodshed and you do those things and you do keep the passion and the flame alive. And for all of us that have spent decades of our lives in and out of rehearsal rooms in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne and Adelaide and Perth or wherever it might be, I think you're pretty much the guy that we could sort of look up to and go, well, this bloke's done it. This is the guy that actually managed to achieve what so many of us wanted to.
I mean, I don't take compliments well, and I don't think of myself in that way. I still think of myself as someone that just, got their hands dirty, went out there and just, grinded it out, ground it out. I mean, it was just, I guess when you think that, it's all, here I am sitting in, New York City and it's been approaching 28 years, I guess I could see how you would say that. But what got me excited was talking about what got me on the journey. And when we start talking about, status base and boom, off we go. So the enthusiasm has not waned at all. Not one iota. I mean, if I turn the filter off and showed you how much crap and get like you've got sitting behind you, I've got exactly the same thing over here to my right.
Yeah.
I love it. I still absolutely love it. But you're right. Those formative years for me, 17 to 21, when I shedded, because that's still important too.
Yeah.
That's what sort of launched me on this path. And then it's just a matter of going, see your mum, see your friends, see your family, which is really freaking hard to leave it all behind. And that's just come home to me, having just returned from Australia, and it just tugged at my heartstrings when I got back on that plane. It was like, man, I miss Australia. I really do,
Yeah, but it's the necessary sacrifice to achieve what you had, because our industry here is not big enough to sustain and support an artist, with a few exceptions. Ian Moss and the Chisel guys are rightly regarded as they're part of the trinity, if you like, of Australian rock with AC/DC and Johnny Farnham and some other people. You know where I'm headed with that one there.
Of course.
But in your own way, and I've listened to a few interviews with you though, but I do believe you're a bit of a trailblazer in your own way, in that it was very common for Australian artists to go to England, Britain. Not so common to go to the United States, but you did that. Okay, so was there a catalyst in your journey where, when you're starting out, it's very hard to conceive that you can end up on a stage 30 years later with Billy Joel? I'm sure that was the case, but was there a catalyst at some point in your journey where you thought, hey, maybe this can happen?
It goes back to being a kid, being, 10, 11 years old and dreaming of being a rock star, right? And then finally you mature a little bit and you realize that first and foremost, you're a musician. And when you make that first leap, when you leave your hometown and quit your day job and get your first professional gig, after you've overcome that first hurdle, the rest of it just seems to be a progression. Well, it was for me, I think. I mean, my first professional gig was Rose Tattoo, and I quit my day job before I was even told that I had got the gig. I auditioned, but I'm like, no, if I'm going to do this, I have to be in Sydney. There's more opportunities here than Adelaide, and I'm going to have to quit my day gig. So I did before I even was told I had the job. Going to the United States after that was just kind of the same thing, but on a bigger level. And I toured here and I'd recorded here, quite a few times. Initially with James Reyne, Back in '88 was the first tour I did here. But then I did records for Angry Anderson in LA, and I was over here doing other stuff. I can't remember now. But I'd been here a bunch of times, and I just thought that there were more opportunities, especially for a guy that was more a rock guy, and that is my sort of upbringing. I'm more a hard rock musician to start with, and I just thought there was more opportunities here. I'd spent a lot of time in Los Angeles recording and hanging out, and not that I was really that much into what was happening in the mid to late '80s, but I saw, like I remember the first day I heard the Faith No More album, and I'm like, okay, this is different. This is different to what's happening in LA. I just felt that the United States offered more opportunity, and I loved New York. I loved it was so unique. I loved the energy of it, and not that I didn't like London. I loved London too, but I just felt an affinity with New York and felt like I needed to try it for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me go back to the very beginning then, and one of the key reasons that I reached out to you. So yes, you've got the most impressive resume from an Australian musician that I can probably point out. But one of the key reasons that I got into you was through Judge Mercy way back in the day in the early '90s. Okay. Right. And I'll never forget, I grew up in Sydney, and I remember my mate used to live in Rydalmere, and I remember walking past the family inn, and they used to have a very small pub on the side, or a venue on the side, called the Hammer House. And I'll never forget, it said Judge Mercy, huge. It was back when they used to paint it on and fluoro writing. Remember that?
Right.
Paint on a blackboard and fluoro writing. This is 92 or 93 or something like that. But it was getting right into heavy metal and hard rock at the time. And I think coincidentally you were in hot metal, or there's an interview or stickers or something like that were in hot metal at the same time. And then you get the sampler CD and you listen to your material. And I think it might have been, what song might it have been? Was it Mr. Fix It maybe? I can't recall now, to be honest.
Mr. Attitude?
Mr. Attitude, sorry. Mr. Attitude, sorry. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Attitude. And what I recall from it, though, was the maturity in it, even back then. It was blues-infused hard rock. And only an Australian, in my view, could have written a song like that. Oh. And then learning about your history with Pete Wells in particular. But I know the Rose Tattoo thing, but working with Pete Wells as you did later on. But I guess that's where I wanted to take a bit of time to dive into, because I appreciate it's a lesser understood or known aspect of your career these days. But how important was Judge Mercy on your journey?
It was my baby. I mean, it was always kind of a plan of mine when I left Adelaide. Join some established bands, get to know the ropes, learn the people in the business that are influential, and then strike out on my own. So you have to understand, firstly, that it sounds like that's kind of, some kind of premeditated narcissist doing this. It wasn't. I mean, I still remember hearing Rock and Roll Outlaw for the first time on Countdown when I was 15 or something, and tearing down the hallway and going, oh my God, that's the greatest riff I've ever heard in my life, and hearing Scarred for Life, and We Can't Be Beaten when they were first released, and going, unbelievable. So I joined a band I loved. And then when that folded, then, I had needed to work on my bass player, and I was lucky enough to go and play with James Reyne for many years, and that was great. But I got to meet a lot of very influential people within the industry. And then it was a big decision for me to resign my position from James after having 3 wonderful years with him, and really some of the most fun touring I'd ever had, and touring the States for the first time, and going to the UK for the first time. And it was a wonderful, wonderful gig. And I'm still in touch with a lot of the guys from that band. But I knew I had to strike out on my own, and I wasn't getting any younger. And so it was a premeditated thing that I quit James's band in 1990, I guess, and went out on my own. And it was my passion project. You know, that's the stuff that I wrote. Actually, a lot of the stuff I'd started writing for Rose Tattoo, but it kind of never came to fruition. And I sort of went, well, these songs are laying around, and I'm really proud of them, and I want to get them heard. And so that was part of the catalyst of doing that. I wasn't really a lead singer, but I sort of sang well enough, and it was an incredibly hard, challenging 5 years, especially the period leading up to getting signed and struggling financially after having a nice job as a touring bass player. But tough as it was, I don't regret a minute of it, and I'm very proud of what we did, especially live. And the fact that we got the AC/DC opening slot before we were even signed, I thought was great. They'd heard the demos and liked it, And in fact, we were only supposed to do Sydney, but they went off to do some other cities. This is the Razor's Edge tour. They went off to do some other cities, and they said, look, we like you guys. We're going to send one of our trucks back through Sydney on the way up to Brisbane and pick up your gear if you'd like to come and open for us in Brisbane. Sure, So I put everything, all my heart and soul into that project. In the end, for various reasons, it didn't work. I have no regrets whatsoever, and I am flattered that people remember the project, fondly.
Yeah, a lot of people do. So Protocol So Holy, epic album, but you can't find it anymore unless you go to Discogs and there's a bit of a crusty old version lying around somewhere that someone wants to sell. So has someone approached you about relaunching it and maybe even doing vinyl, that type of thing? I've
seen a couple of postings online about that kind of thing. I haven't reached out to the people that were involved, the Massive Records, about doing that. I guess I should. I will say that I'm in the process of trying to finish another hard rock album currently, and I hope to have it done, in between touring commitments by the end of February, and perhaps that will then be a catalyst to get that other stuff released. Obviously, I would think that the Judge Mercy faithful would be interested in the new stuff, and if I can tell you, I'm looking at a wall of Marshalls here. It's an understatement. So, so perhaps that's a thing that would happen. As again, I'm flattered that people still remember that. That's 30 years ago. Yeah.
What's the moniker or the name that you're releasing the new hard rock material under?
I mean, I was thinking, under my own name because, but would it be right to release it as Judge Mercy? Not really, because I think the other three guys, Mick, Izzy, and Craig, all gave 110% as well, and this will just be me doing this with probably a number of drummers over here that will play on it for me. So I'm not sure whether it'll just be Andy Cichon or whether it will be, I don't think it would be Judge Mercy. I don't think that would be right. I mean, because the other thing was towards the end of Judge Mercy, and there are a few tracks on that Protocol So Holy record. Izzy Osmanovic especially was contributing a lot of the writing, and some really great writing, and the demos for what would have been the next record were a lot more shared. The contribution between Izzy and myself was starting to level up a little bit more. So that was Judge Mercy. This is Andy.
Yeah. Okay. So with regards to those demos, have you thought about bringing them to life at any stage?
They were recorded on a 4-track Porter studio. If you remember the old cassette-based 4-track recorders that were around all those years. You have one? So, and I'll find them, Andrew, and I'll send you some copies, because basically it was
unreal.
I got them mastered, and every now and then somehow there's some copies of it rolling around Newcastle, and every now and then something will pop up and they go, I can't believe you did this on a 4-track. It's like, that was my way of working back then. But I'll send you some copies for your ears only. They're not releasable. Although I did take them to a mastering studio. This must have been 94 or something like that. And the guy asked me what studio I'd recorded it at. I went, Studio 244. for the studio. So, it was a little Marshall Lead 12 and program drums, although I play drums, so I tend to program realistically,
What led to the demise of Judge Mercy?
Well, some may say it was a contractual dispute, but really the album didn't do anything. I can put my hand up, say that. There were some interesting marketing strategies involved, but I'm not about to point the finger. Is it a sensational album? In hindsight, I don't think so. I was not good at what's the word? Allocating responsibility. I was very much hands-on. I was too close to it, and that includes the mixing of the record. And I wasn't happy with my vocal performance. I'd taken too much time off recording it, and then had to step back in and sing. Where I'm the kind of singer where the more I sing, the better I get. And 5-6 nights a week is great for me, but 5 or 6 weeks off and then in the studio. So I didn't really like my vocal performance. But what caused it not to be? I don't know. I mean, any number of 100 reasons. So we did have a budget to do a second album, although greatly reduced. We probably could have done a good record, but at that point we were going through our managerial split, and there was court involved, and people were distracted, and it just seemed like it was time to call it a day after nearly 5 years of hard slog.
Yeah. But it was a light that burnt very brightly there for a period of time. To your point about the AC/DC Razor's Edge tour, I mean, getting a gig prior to even an album coming out is a heck of an accomplishment. But it wasn't just that. There was Iron Maiden, Megadeth, and I think Deep Purple or Ian Gillan as well that you opened for. What, do you have any notable stories or memories from any of those shows and tours?
I mean, just obviously AC/DC was like, that was the first I'd played arenas and stadiums before as a bass player, but for the first time having to go out there and work an arena stage, and sing and keep some oxygen in the lungs, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a little different, we were warmly received. I seem to remember that with the AC/DC thing, and even at the Iron Maiden thing, we were never a metal band. We're a hard rock band, and we were still. I was encouraged by the warm reception that we got. We just loved to gig. I mean, we loved playing all the time, and I think we were a great live band. The one funny story I remember about AC/DC was walking off the stage one night, and on that tour, their Marshall stacks were on a subterranean riser that would all come up out of the stage when they took the stage. So there was a little gap in the stage where this riser would, eventually, rise from the depths. And I remember walking off after our set, and my leg went down the chute up to my knee, and I thought I'd broken my leg. And Brian was watching from the side of stage, like, "Hey, son, you're late. Oh gosh!" And so that was a funny moment. And also, I remember at soundcheck in Brisbane one day, the gentleman. Pierre, I forget his name, the gentleman that made Wizard amplifiers, which Malcolm was using at the time. He liked the band. And at soundcheck this day, he said, "Look, I thought you might like to try one." So he had one of Malcolm's, wow. I think there were 400-watt Wizard amps set up for me with two 4x12s, two quad boxes. And I remember it being like a Back to the Future moment where I hit one big power chord. It was like, massive and clean and fat, and that was hoot because the guy liked the band, and that's kind of, gosh, it's 30 years ago, so that's 32 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you have any significant interactions with Steve Harris, that is, or even Malcolm?
I did not. I don't remember chatting to the Iron Maiden guys at all, although that might just be my bad memory. I do remember interacting with Cliff on the AC/DC thing and with Brian. And Cliff was very helpful when I moved to the States, when I was just basically cold calling everybody. And he was, I got in touch with his management. He called me one morning and said, look, mate, I only know the 4 other geezers in my band, but if I hear of anything, I'll be sure to let you know. And he offered me, he offered me a free bass and all sorts of stuff. He was very kind to me. And Brian over the years, we've had interaction through Billy. Brian's gotten up a bunch of times, as has Cliff once in Tampa, and there's a friendship and acquaintanceship there.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Well, look, I kind of mentioned it up top, but I will of course do a bit more in the introduction. But I just wanted to mention these names out loud with you in case I miss any. But so Pete Wells's band, these are the people that you've played with in Australia and beyond. The significant people. I know there's others, but people that could Google and wrap their head around. So Pete Wells, Rose Tattoo, Swanee. I didn't know that, but Swanee. Ivor and Icehouse. There you go. You play a significant role there, I think, but we'll talk about that if that's cool. But you mentioned Darryl Braithwaite, but James Reyne, iconic Australian vocalist, Australian crawl vocalist. Natalie Grant, I'll admit I had to look her up, but she's huge in the States. Not so big here, but massive in the States. And then the 3 big ones, and this is why I put you on the dais with the guys like Mark King and Steve Harris. You're talking Tony Bennett, Shania Twain, and Billy Joel. So you've enjoyed this enormous career. But I asked you that question earlier about the catalyst because there was a bit of a glimmer early on, wasn't there? In Suddenly, you co-wrote the song, but the point is that this is a song that was beamed into every living room across Britain and Australia in 1987, I think it was. And you co-wrote that song. So this is well before even Judge Mercy came around when you were working with Rose and Rose Tattoo and Angry. So is there apart from the fact that the song, it went on to live its own life and has become iconic in its own way, but is there how did you get involved in something like that is the question.
So suddenly I'm a classically trained pianist. That's my first instrument. And I wrote the whole piano figure. That's me playing piano on the recording. And I think I play other keys as well. I play fretless bass on it. But I wrote that like as a teenager, like a 15 or 16-year-old, just the figure, la na 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 na, that thing. And then the chorus is another thing I wrote, and we sort of stuck them together. But we were doing the Rose Tattoo album, Beats from a Single Drum. There'd been a change. Angry had kind of been busy doing movie stuff, and he was on the midday show and stuff. And it had moved away we'd also moved away from Albert's. I joined to promote the Southern Stars album, which was still an Albert's record, still a great hard rock album that had I Wish and Freedom's Flame and songs like that on it. And then we moved away from Albert's to Mushroom, and it kind of shifted, and we got in a really hard-working, diligent American producer called Kevin Beamish, who had done REO Speedwagon and sort of more polished AOR rock bands. The guy worked really, really hard, but that also brought about the change in sound, for what Angry and Rose Tattoo were doing. I mean, I had no idea. The way that song got to be recorded is there was a beautiful grand piano in at Rhinoceros Studios. And in a break from recording, I'm like, wow, full-size Yamaha Grand. I went in and played piano because that's really my first instrument. There was a vocal mic on in the recording room, and Kevin Beamish turned it on to listen to what I was doing. And he walked into the recording room and said, "What's that?" I went, "Oh, it's a tune I wrote as a teenager." And he said, "Well, why didn't you submit it for the record?" And I was said, "Well, it's a Rose Tattoo album. We're a rock and roll band. It's like, he said, no, man, no, that's that. We should knock that into shape. That'd be a hit in the States." Well, next minute we're over at his rented house in Mossman, knocking it into shape, and it was a combination of those 2 piano figures that I'd written, and a folder full of lyrics where I found the "Suddenly You're Seeing Me Just the Way I Am" thing, and we kind of combined the 2 songs. Angry just sent me photographs of that writing session about a month ago.
Mhm.
You know, like I'm a 21-year-old kid, you know, and angry, sort of, you know, buff and everything, and so that's how it came to be recorded. I get that the diehard Rose Tattoo fans were like, "What the f," you know, um, and I agree in some ways. You know, I think it's a nice piece of music, and but having said that, it was my ANZ, you know, welcome back to Australia slush fund. So, you know, it did generate money over the years and still does. And um, I'm not going to disown the tune. I'm proud of the song. And, you know, it's funny, Kylie was at the MCG show we played in 22, and I just missed it, but I love to have found her and said,
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask you.
I wrote your wedding song.
That's exactly, was my next question, actually. Did you have a chance to talk to Jason or Kylie about it? But so, Jason, Donovan, have you had any interactions with him about it?
No, never have. But she was at the gig with Guy Pearce in 22. I was talking to John Stevens before the show and didn't get a chance to say hello to them. But there you go. So yeah, you know, that was suddenly.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Man of Colours, 1987. So this is off the back of Guy Pratt, and was it Rob Kirchmer? Was he also the bassist in the band, or Andy Kunter? Was it? Sorry, I can't. My Icehouse is.
So I think I did that a lot later, actually, and all I did with Ivor was I played on 2 tracks on a compilation. It was the I think it was called Great Southern Land or something. It was a compilation of past Icehouse material with 2 new tracks. And I played bass on 2 tracks. One is called Billy Dean, which I get to do a bit of this on, actually, and fretless stuff there. And then there's another track, I can't remember the title now. So I did those 2 songs, and then I did about 3 weeks with Icehouse when they were doing the Berlin tour. It was a thing with the Sydney Dance Company with Graham Murphy. So I toured with them for 3 weeks. I don't know why Steve Ball, the regular guy, was off doing something else, and so I filled in for 3 weeks and did that recording. That's the extent of my Icehouse contribution. But Ivor, I saw about 10 years ago. We did a Stone Music Festival thing in Sydney, and they were on the same night, and I got to see everybody and say hi. And Ivor wrote me a great reference for my green card application, and nothing but fond memories of my time working with him.
Was there an opportunity for you to stick around for, I think Code Blue was the follow-up, if I'm not mistaken. So
rings a bell, but no, I was really just filling in for Steve Ball, who was the regular guy, or maybe it was Steve Morgan at the time. I can't quite remember. Again, this is 30 plus years ago. But my 2 tracks on recording and 3 weeks on the road was pretty much it for me. And a lot of some of the other acts you're mentioning, like Tony Bennett and things like that they were situations where these people have guested with Billy Joel. So, you know, a lot of those big artists are people who have got up on stage with us to do a song or so, like Tony Bennett and Steve Tyler and Brian Johnson and, you know, John Bon Jovi, and all those people have come up, especially during this last run at Madison Square Garden of the last 10 years. They've got up, you know, on particular nights and had a play with us. It's been a hoot.
Oh yeah, and I want to get to all of that, but I want to talk about Edge, the album you did with Darryl Braithwaite, for a moment. That's cool, because you played bass on that album, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, yeah.
Okay, that was the moment, and forgive the way I'm going to describe this, but when I knew you were a very fucking serious bass player, because having to play covers, I'm very used to listening to a song, and often things just get called out and you've just got to go with it. It's like, oh my God, what key is it in? And I'll just figure it out after the second chorus. You know, that's usually, sometimes that happens. You no doubt you played covers, or you've been thrown into those positions, so you know where I'm coming from. But a song that you can't do that on is One Summer. So I remember being told One Summer's going to be in the set this weekend. Have a listen. I thought, well, it's just, to be honest, I thought it's just Darryl Braithwaite. I'll listen to it an hour beforehand or whatever. All right, thank God I didn't. A few days out, I sat down and listened to it and I went, holy shit. I Oh, because it's a pattern, it's a groove, and it's one of those songs that without the bass line, the song no longer works. That's the key point. That's what I wanted to share with you. So that, and again, that's the moment where I really started to dive into your work and to understand, I think, the type of player you were. But that's my perspective on things. What's your perspective on that recording?
Thank you. I'm flattered, and I do I'm proud of that bass line. It was my recollection of that recording of that song, or rehearsing it up in pre-production, was that Darryl had the melody and had the chord changes, but it was like Gring started out last night, boom, like that, and then we sort of got that jink 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 jink, that thing going, and then I don't know, I hear stuff before I play it, and I just came up with a bass line, and I was very flattered one night when one of my all-time favourite Australian bass players came up to me one night. I can't remember the name of the club. It was in Sydney, down by the Rocks.
The basement, I think it was called.
Yeah, it was something else. It was around it doesn't matter. But Victor Rounds, who was a bass player that I respect massively, came up to me and went like, "You?" I'm like, "What?" I said, "One Summer, that bass line, man, that's freaking incredible." And I'm like, it's not difficult to play, but I think it's melodic and thank you, memorable. And that's kind of what I've always tried to go for. I miss doing sessions more. I used to do a lot more, especially back in Australia. But here I've kind of ended up being like the touring guy. I do remote sessions now and then for other people. There's a young woman out of Chicago called Kelsey Montanez, who I'm playing on her current stuff. And I would like to think I'm bringing that same kind of energy to that. But thank you. I'm proud of that bass line, albeit it's 36 years old or whatever it is.
It's just, I did a show recently, or I put together all these iconic bass performances, and I love doing this stuff and diving into it, because a lot of my audience, they're musicians as well, and introducing them to people like you and Larry Graham and these players. A lot of the people who listen are more familiar with hard rock, heavy metal, extreme metal in particular. But because we're musicians, very open-minded to the musician's contribution and performance. And in that way, I believe, like I do, I can often sit down and listen to a song I ordinarily, great case in point, Heaven by Eurogliders. You probably know Ronnie Francois. Now, right. Don't think much of the song, to be quite honest with you, but the bass line is just enormous. Absolutely monstrous bass line that he contributed. And
it is. I'm thinking of it now, yeah.
Yeah, and I've had the opportunity to talk to him in the same way that I'm talking to you now. But I played on a couple of Eurogliders tracks too. Oh, really?
It Must Be Love. You'd probably get a kick out of that one. Okay. It Must Be Love, and there's another tune. It's off the album Groove, I think. Groove Baby. There's two tracks on it. I didn't play on that song. I played on that record, but It Must Be Love was a single that I played on, and there's another track, but again I forget. And It Must Be Love's also I got kind of hired a lot to be a bit of a Pino Palladino ripoff, because I had a fretless, and I loved what he did with all the Paul Young stuff, the octave pedal and the chorus on top. And so that's I used to get hired a lot to do that kind of stuff. I played a lot of fretless on the Braithwaite albums as well, and I enjoyed it. I'm a little rusty these days, but so yeah, I did play with, and Ronnie Francois was a great bassist for sure.
How did you go in? It's one thing to play fretless live, but in the studio is another thing altogether. I'm sure, gosh, but playing fretless in a studio, how did you go with the intonation side of things?
I find it easier in the studio because it's, you're in a more controlled environment. You're sitting down normally, especially with fretless. Live, I used to play quite a bit of fretless with Shania Twain live, and that was kind of nerve-wracking because the guys that played on the record were superb session musicians, and I've got Mutt Lang out front listening to my performance, so it's got to be. So that was a little more nerve-wracking, but I'm trying to think what I would have. I think I was playing Music Man basses then, so I remember the early the rose tattoo stuff with fretless would have been a Yamaha, and I remember it had fret markings on it. But when I switched to Music Man on the Braithwaite records and stuff like that, there was no fret marks. It was just, you just get used to the extra stretch, you know. And I've only got little hands, but you sort of, you know,
have to slide into. I mean, it's purpose built for like tromboning, I call it, into the note. Did you do a lot of that?
Oh yeah, and you know, make that, you know, find roughly where the actual spot is, the perfect pitches, and just move around a lot, because you know it's all going to even out eventually, you know.
Yeah. Hey, what did you learn from the master, Pete Wells?
Oh, passion, spontaneity, how to smoke a lot of cigarettes. Just you know, oh man, he was such a sweet guy. I remember doing an album with him in Germany, with Mick O'Shea, Judge Mercy's drummer, and Lucy DeSoto. We had a week, and like we would go through. He'd have a song idea, and we'd go through it once, you know, and he'd go like, "That's it." I go, "Okay, well, let's do it." And he said, "No, that's it. We got it. If we do it again, it's going to lose the spontaneity of it all. I love the energy of that. It's raw. It's great. Done." And I'm like, wow. And you know, you can beat a dog to death going over and over and over and losing some of that. Especially in like rock, blues-based rock. I think that the little fluff notes and the little, you know, overtones and the extra string you hit by mistake in the whole morass of what ends up coming out at the end, you don't hear it. It just adds an energy and a spark to it. I think that's why I much prefer the Judge Mercy live EP to the album. There's mistakes all over it and rawness and stuff, but the energy is there, and that's what Pete realized. Pete realized that it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to have soul and energy and personality. And that's the main thing I learned from Pete Wells.
From the outside, I always remember walking down, was it Parramatta Road? I've been out of Sydney a long time these days, but I think you had a tattoo shop there, House of Pain, next to the bass player. You used to have to walk past it to get to the bass player at Annandale, where I bought my Music Man basses all those years ago.
Okay.
Like 28 years ago, whenever the hell it was now. But, yeah, with things... You mentioned that he's a sweetheart, but he looks very rough on stage, to be honest. It looks like as though you really have to know your shit personally and musically to keep up with him. Was he like that off stage as well?
You know, it's just part of what I do, and that is prepare properly for things. Thankfully, I've probably got a good enough ear that I can wing it a little bit. But like you said, if you wouldn't have listened to the One Summer bass line, just tried to wing it, it wouldn't have worked. So I always do my homework, and I always, you know, whatever he may have thrown at me, I had covered. But in the studio, like I just mentioned, it was like, you know, here's the progression, let's go for it and see what happens. And he was never over demanding. You know, the good guys hire you because they like the way you play. And that's, I remember going to Billy once. I don't change a lot of stuff with Billy's music because it's iconic, and a lot of those bass lines are iconic. Far be it from me to mess with, you know, something that was recorded 35, 40 years ago and already produced. I'm not going to reproduce the record. But there was one song in particular which I wanted to change. I wanted to, it's a swing song called Big Man on Mulberry Street. I wanted to walk the tagline.
Yeah.
And the bass follows the change. Boom, boom, boom. And I thought, boom, 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 boom. And I walked. I said, you know, if you're not digging it, then I'll go back to it. It says, I hired you because I like the way you play. You do whatever you want. He knows, he's got enough faith in the musician to realize that we're not going to stray too far away from the core of what the song is about. And Pete was the same way. You know, I mean, he hired the guy that wrote Suddenly, that was, you know, that kind of changed the direction of his iconic band that he formed. But he must have still seen something in me that was like, no, I like the way he plays. He should come play with me. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I hear. Yeah. Well, what about, just speaking about Rose Tattoo again? What about Angry? Is again, I think the shows are still raucous affairs with a lot of drinking and carrying on, and he must be in his 70s by now or near to it.
Oh yeah,
But
he's 15 years older than me, so he's got to be 76.
holy shit, yeah. Apparently, he's still raising hell, and I just look. I haven't. Unbelievably, I've never seen the tats. So I don't know. I don't know how that happened, but it's just one of those things that has sort of eventuated. But were things with him a lot of drinking, a lot of carrying on, or is that just really part of the? When I say the veneer, you know what I mean.
I mean, sorry, I've got a new phone. I don't know how to turn
Right.
it off. Um, um, you know, I was 21. You know, I'm sure I was drinking a ton of beer and carrying on. But it wasn't anything outrageous. I think he'd already at that point he was already in his late 30s.
Mm.
So we had fun. We had fun on the road. It was great. Um, but man, it was like just powerful. It was just like get behind the wheel of a Big Mac truck, and driving down to Goulburn flat out, like just bulldozer, get out of our way, here we come. I'll never forget my first gig with Rose Tattoo. It was just, I'm like, wow, this is something. So yeah,
Was that when Pete was still in the band?
Pete was gone, man. It was again, that's why I say it was really that Southern Stars band.
Yeah.
So it was John Meyer from Perth on guitar, who wrote songs like I Wish, and that was a great record. The Southern Stars album was fantastic. I replaced Geordie Leach, who had left at that point. So it was only Angry really left. It was the great Tim Gaze on guitar from Tam and Shud and Carver Stewart, and Tim and I are still in touch, and Scott Johnston on drums. So it was a brand new. Well, John had been there and Scott had been there on the album before, but Tim Gaze and I joined at the same time. So yes, Pete had long gone. Again, why I felt so flattered that he would ask me to come out and play with him.
Hey, are you in touch with Bob Daisley at all?
Acquainted with, only through again. A huge fan. I remember of course, I loved the Aussie albums that he played on, and also remember there's a song by Uriah Heep called "Stay on Top," which is Bob at his best, greatest P bass sound you've ever heard. Check out that bass line, you'll love it. Stay on Top, Uriah Heep. But I was involved with a band out of Adelaide actually called Cherry Grind. They're a young band trying to get ahead. Bob produced their record, and I think there was some emailing back and forth about that. And of course, Bob also played with Tim Gaze.
Mm.
Yeah,
yeah.
So
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's a very, very loose association. I don't think we've emailed in probably 6 or 7 years.
You're pretty much the two guys from a bass playing and Australian perspective, really, aren't you? I mean, I'm trying to think of two other people that have broken out and really. I'm talking about doing something globally significant, like where you mention the artist's name and you can go to Iceland and they go, yeah, okay, I know that person, that type of thing. But do you have moments to? I appreciate your contribution is ongoing and you're a humble fella. I get that, but. I mean, do you have many opportunities to reflect when people ask you those sorts of questions?
I guess so, a little bit. Like, I was just inducted into the South Australian Music Hall of Fame when I was home, a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, yeah, I'm flattered and humbled and stuff. I just think I'm so lucky to have made a living out of this for the last 40 years, and to still love it. And I know it's not false humility. I'm no freaking virtuoso bass player. Let me tell you that. I am not. I'm not a guy that sits in the room and practices all day. I play music for 2 or 3 hours a day, but it might be guitar, it might be piano. I'll always pick the bass up at some point, even if it's for 15 minutes. I've never been interested in being the greatest technician ever. I spend my life down that end of the neck, not this end of the neck. I just love playing great songs in a great band. That's really, so when people sort of, it's not like I'm uncomfortable with it, but I'm certainly not someone that would get up on stage and, trade licks with Victor Wooten, or it's not me. I'm a guy that, you paid me the ultimate compliment when you mentioned the bass line in One Summer. Like, I love doing that. I love, being creative in that way and coming up with a memorable bass line. And I love playing with great drummers and playing great songs. And luckily, do I love every tune in Billy Joel's set? No. Do I love enough of them that I find it satisfying? Absolutely. And do I find some incredibly challenging and rewarding? Absolutely. It's great to be a bass player in a great band, and I am.
The compliment I paid Gary Beers when I spoke to him was that I think, just going by the numbers, he's the most listened to Australian bass player ever. I think you are the most witnessed Australian bass player ever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it probably does. I mean, I've done a lot of big shows. It's rewarding and kind of weird in a way too, because nowadays we all have the in-ear monitors on, or as my good friend Jason Mowry calls them, vibe condoms, because it blocks out the real world. But and I've said this before in other interviews that it's as big as the room might be, the MCG, 75,000 people or whatever it is. It's really quite intimate on stage. You can see it, you see the front few rows, and you can see out in the stand, you see the lights and stuff, but you never get away from the fact that you're playing with 8 other guys and gal on this stage, and it's very intimate in a way, and when you have eye contact with someone over, maybe someone's made a little slip up, or someone's played something great, or whatever. It's like a bunch of kids in a rehearsal room sometimes, Yeah. It's really very small in a way. I don't really think about the vastness of the room or stadium. I just think about doing a great show with, oh God, this is so boring. You want me to say, yeah, man, I could give you that if you want. I could tell you that I've got butterflies every night I go on stage, and that would be a lie. I can only be sincere and tell you that I love doing it. I love working at that level of professionalism with the touring setup that Billy has and Shania had and stuff. It's amazing to work at that level. But when we hit the stage, it's 8 geezers, playing together. Yeah. And that's really what it's all about, and wanting to play really, really well together.
Mm. Yeah. Have you had any sliding doors moments? I mean, you've played with 2 of the biggest ever, but were there other opportunities that you had to knock back, scheduling commitments or otherwise?
Have you been told something?
No, not at all.
Okay. Yes, there have been. There have been, and I've had conflicts before when I was out working in Vegas with Shania Twain. I left her employ back in 2013. I used to be able to somehow manage to juggle both for a time. It nearly killed me. I think there was one period in 03 or 04. I was across the Atlantic 4 times in 8 days and 8 times in 20 days. But I made it work. And at the end of middle of 13, I was in Vegas with her, and Billy was about to fire up again, and I resigned my place with her then and went back to Billy. There have been some tough calls where it's been really hard to say, wow, I'm incredibly flattered. I'm not going to name names, but I've been supported by William Martin Joel for the last 25 years, and I will never leave his employ, because he's been so good to me and continues to be. And there's been some tough decisions that have to be made over the years.
Well, clearly your instincts have been on point, and in terms of your managerial structure and the bands and the artists that you've chosen to work with. But I guess, when we talk about a wish list, and if you had all of the time in the world and you could teleport yourself anywhere, so you could play one gig on a Tuesday night, the next gig in London, the next gig in Sydney on the Wednesday night, that type of thing, what would be, as I say, this is just your wish list, what would be the ultimate gig for you?
This could be self-incriminating, so I'm not going to go there. There's bands I adore. You've touched on where I'm at with what I did with Judge Mercy, which was blues-based hard rock. So when you think about that, you're going to go with bands like, I love The Cult. I think Sonic Temple is one of the greatest rock records ever made. Mickey Curry playing drums on that, Bryan Adams drummer. So there'll be a common theme to all this. Just an absolute groove drummer, right? I'm going to go from that to say, well, AC/DC, of course, Phil Rudd, the new guy, Matt Laug, monster swing drummer. It's ridiculous how well he swings. Believe it or not, Rammstein, Steph, forget his last name now, the drummer from Rammstein. That guy swings. I love Rammstein. I really do. I think they're so musical, and I think they, it's just, oh man, he's just, check out the groove. It's, he's got metal chops and stuff, but that guy swings. That's got to be the common thread for me. I've got to have a really great relationship with the drummer. And I always had that. I was lucky enough to have that with John Watson Watto playing in James's band, and I play with Chuck Berge now, who used to play with Rainbow. That's the other thing about Billy's band. We've got two members of Rainbow, Blue Oyster Cult, Foreigner, Joan Jett, Rose Tattoo. Judge Mercy. It's really kind of like a hard rock backbone to that band. Mark, the sax player, used to play in Foreigner. He's the he's urgent. So that would be, if you're talking about hard rock bands, I loved Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in the day. Rest in peace, Tom. I still love the Black Crowes. I think they're awesome. Their new record's great. So, any one of those, but it's unlikely to ever happen because I would, I'm committed to staying with Mr. Joel.
Is it Martin Lenoble or Chris Chaney from Jane's Addiction is playing bass in AC/DC? I mean, I know. I understand you don't want to sort of go down this line too much, but I couldn't imagine they get a bass player than you, being Australian and understanding that music, the DNA of it. I'm talking about, to perform in the touring band these days. Is that? I mean, again, I'm talking hypotheticals, but is that a gig you embrace?
Who would want to play bass in the greatest rock band in the world? Sure, but it's not even a discussion. And Chris, anyone knows Chris's background knows he's a great bass player and a well-deserving bass player. And and the band is, you got to think without Phil there, and it's really, Angus of course still lives in Australia, but it's really not been that Australian-centric thing for a long time, apart from the fact that the attitude and the songs and all those early records and even the newer records obviously have Australia running through their bloodlines. It's I think the new lineup's great from what I've seen on YouTube and stuff. I love Matt's playing. They've played together before, so I can't fault that.
Yeah, I noticed there is some conjecture. It's really amongst Australian musicians who've I don't want to use the term disown, but it's close to that, disown AC/DC. And I'm not a huge fan, I'll be honest with you, being a bassist. So I've got to be quite frank with you on that. You know, it's a big jump from Mark King to AC/DC, and I know they've got the Boogie Kings, and I get that. But, excuse me, but they are a band that could only ever have come from the working pubs and clubs of the inner west of Sydney. That's the sound of as you know, you get it. That's Rose Tattoo, AC/DC, that sound. There are a ton of other bands, even Spies versus Spies, you know, that gnarly four to the floor, really hitting it, pushing the measure of the beat right to the very end before it falls apart.
The Angels, the Choir Boys, the Poor. That's, I love that stuff. It sounds like meat and potatoes, but no one else in the world can do it. That's what the Angels played at my high school when Doc was still playing bass. I used to go and see Cold Chisel, sneak in with underage and stuff. It's so I know what you're saying, but again, I would just like to go back to the fact that anyone that's hired at that level understands and respects that just like you and I do. They get it. They get that. They understand that. You got to understand that band you mentioned is just world renowned, and so if you would study every nuance of what it's about, the groove, the feel, the tone, and never mess with it. And I'm sure that's how the new guys are approaching it. So and they're complete, total pros. So I will not disparage them in any way, shape, or form. I'm sure they are as devoted to that craft and that band's musical message, as anyone could be, in Australia.
Yeah. But what about Shania then? Because as I say, I've played a bunch of her material over the years, and you've been on stage with her. You've seen the reaction of people in the audience when she plays those massive hits that she's got. And I experience a tiny glimmer of that when I do it, but I see people running from one side of the bar to the other to come up the front and do the that bit and all the rest of it. I'm doing the backing vocals and all that stuff too. But was the that strikes me as a really fun gig. Was that the case?
The dance moves weren't. The outfits weren't. But you have to understand that that was kind of the big break for me here. I got here in April of '97 and was lucky enough to do some touring with a band called Five for Fighting, John Ondrasik. But they were signed to a New York EMI label, and that had closed just after their first album came out. So I was out on the road with them for like 2 or 3 months, and then that ended because they had to go find a new record deal. In that time, I then got the Shania Twain gig. And, I didn't realize that the album prior to that big record, which is called Come On Over, the album before that was called The Woman in Me, that had sold 14 million copies in the United States. We'd never heard of it in Australia. In fact, I remember the cold call to Landau Management that looked after Bruce Springsteen, Natalie Merchant, etc. And I'm speaking to my buddy Noel Rush, who had kindly let me sleep on his couch when I tried to get this up and running over here. And I'm like, the receptionist said, I think I did my spiel, bass player from Sydney. I used to play in Rose Tattoo and Icehouse and whatever. Name drop the names that Billy thought that would be known in the United States. Oh, we might be looking for someone for Shania Twain. And I'm like, and he was like, big country, big. And I'm like, okay, I'll send off my resume and my tape, et cetera, et cetera. So I really wasn't aware of how huge she was over here, but she'd never toured before. So that band was handpicked by her and Mutt Lang, a superb band of musicians, with a little help from me because I threw in Randall Waller's name from Avion, who was a band I admired in Australia when I was growing up. And amazing, that first tour, 2 years long, all over the world. And Still the One is a brilliant pop song. And man, I feel like a woman as much as it gives me a tick, the gang, gang, gang. Think about what comes after it.
Yeah.
Get in. That bluesy thing, so many guitar players that auditioned for that position could not do it. And Mutt, I was the band leader at that point, and Mutt said to me, why can't they get it? Why can't they swing? It's just like an AC/DC riff.
Exactly. Yep.
It's LaGrange. Round. It's ZZ Top. It went, exactly. Yeah. And so many that was the mentality behind the song. It rocked, it grooved, it swung, and really the band did. The drummer, again, drummers. J.D. Blair, the drummer on those tours, he's so much of a groove drummer. He's got the groove regulator written on his kick drum head. And he was Victor Wooten's drummer for a long, long time. So, again, a great musical experience playing in a great band, playing great songs. I didn't really get to inject anything much because I was copying what was on the records that were done by Nashville session musicians. But I got to copy some amazing players, and it was challenging. It was a great experience,
Yeah. Okay. So the sliding doors moment was an opportunity to work with Billy, and look, I think any bass player would make the decision that you made. But was it challenging for you to make that decision?
So it came about because it's funny. I just told you I just got a new phone today. I've just changed my phone service after 25 years. And I was reminiscing with the gentleman at the store. He knows what I do. And I said, yeah, well, back in 1994, I was living in Sydney and I had my first opportunity to play with Billy. Their bass player, T-Bone Walk, had to go home all of a sudden on tour. And I was at my lawyer's office in my managerial mess with Judge Mercy, and had been the last holdout to get a mobile phone. I didn't want one. Mm-hmm. I got home to my house in Sydney, and there was smoke coming out of the old tape voicemail machine from Billy Joel's sound guy saying, look, we need someone in an emergency. We've got 2 days for you to learn the material. We'll get all the music to you from Sony Records. Can you come? Can you come? Over 4 hours, eventually it was like, if we don't hear from you in 15 minutes, I missed out. And it ended up being Stuart Speed, who was the bass player in the opening act. It was the Vicar and Linda were opening for So he ended up doing it and did a great job. So that was my first chance of missing out and filling in. I had done some recording with him in '99, 2 tracks for a movie, Runaway Bride, and something else. And then I did a 12-song corporate lunchtime thing in July of '99. And obviously my profile was up, I was on the road with Shania at the time. I was home on a break, but I was in New York. His guy was in Nashville. I then finished with Shania on a Sunday night in December of '99 after being on the road for 2 years, and was asked to fill in for 2 shows the following week. So I'm madly learning a 2.5-hour Billy Joel set, and I flew into St. Louis on the Thursday for the Friday show with no rehearsal, and just had to get up on stage and do it. Luckily, I also asked someone that works with him, apart from his material, what else does he like? Right. Cream, Hendrix, Zeppelin. So I just touched on a little bit of everything. A bit of Cream, just like a little refresher. Again, preparation, halfway through this, sold out arena in St. Louis. And he just turns to Tommy, the guitar player, and just goes, like, too dang gang. And Tommy, I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Well, Tommy just goes, glang, 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 in the days of my... And we launch into Good Times, Bad Times. Mm. Luckily, I'd listened to it, because that's, again, not the work of a moment on bass. Yeah. I had it. I'd listened to it. I was prepped. And I maintain to this day that I should thank John Paul Jones for getting the Billy Joel gig, and probably that Billy was more impressed that I could play, Good Times, Bad Times than Uptown Girl. And that's how I got the gig. I filled in for 2 shows, the end of 99. The other guy came back. When Billy went back out on the road in 2000, I was the guy.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you've been there ever since, clearly. God, that's
Ever since. Yep.
25 years later. Amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. And do you feel like, for someone on the out, it's interesting, isn't it, talking to you, because for anybody else, Billy Joel would be the career-defining performance. But your career has been so broad, and I already mentioned that the 13 years before year 2000, you wrote one of the biggest hit songs it was on Smash Hits 1987. I think we all had that. It was practically issued when you were a young fella growing up or a young girl growing up in Australia. But you'd had that enormous, when I say success, people had listened to a song you'd written in your bedroom, God knows how many years earlier or what have you. But that's the interesting thing talking to you, is that as I say, for most people, working with Shania or Billy Joel would be the definition of your career. But do you feel that it's just an aspect of your career, or do you feel like your work is still ongoing, or how would you frame that?
I mean, what do you do when you've got a song like that that's a big hit? Do you think you're special? Do you think? I mean, I don't. I think about the process of writing the song and recording it, and listening back in the studio, and going, okay, well that could be a hit. I don't think about it, in any other way. I mean, at the moment that you start to think that you are special, and there's not someone else that's done just the same thing in a cellar or a basement or a bedroom around the corner, that might not have the avenue to promote or push that out into the public sphere, then you're just an ego, maniac, and it's like a narcissist. And I'm, again, it sounds like I'm being falsely humble. I've been doing this for 40 years professionally. I am so freaking lucky. I hope it never ends. I hope I'm going till it's like 2, 3, 4. I'm out. It's been fun. Boom. I mean, I can't think of a better way to go. I never want to stop. And I remember being a young man looking at older guys in their 40s still playing, going, oh, really? Oh, gosh. Their hair's a little grey. There's some wrinkles. It's like, I don't give a shit. I'm a musician, not a freaking actor. To quote Swanee, one night, someone, at that time, John had a little bit of a belly going. And he said, someone was giving him a hard time pointing his belly. He said, yeah, I'm a singer, not a model. And, I'm a musician. The rock star bullshit, not interested, don't care. I live a very quiet, private life with my wife and kids and my dog and my basement full of guitars and crap. And I'm just really, really grateful that I've been doing it for so long.
I don't want to dive into your personal life too much. I appreciate there's a fence around these things, but look, you have figured out how to have a family and also be a musician on the road too. That's obviously very, I mean, I'm a musician and I only do it on the weekends, and it can be bloody challenging, but I can't imagine at the scale that you're doing it at, where you were away for literally months at a time. How challenging is it?
Well, it was very challenging for my wife and for my kids, I'm sure. Luckily, the real madness of those long tours subsided kind of at the end of 2004, 2005. There were still stints, but I mean, those Shania Twain tours were 2 years long, and you'd come home for 4 or 5 days and then be gone for another 4 or 5 weeks, and family would come out when they could. But my kids were born in 03 and 05, so right during that period I was gone, and then I remember that the next big long thing probably was when I was out in Vegas with Shania in the end of 12 to 13, month on, month off, month on, month off. It's challenging and it's hard being a long distance dad, and any amount of Zooming and FaceTiming, it helps, but it's not a substitute for being there. Luckily, and this is another great thing about working with Bill, is that really the last 10 years, it's been 2 shows a month, apart from if we go overseas. It's been Madison Square Garden, which is I catch the subway. They'll send me a fancy car. I'm like, I catch the subway and I'm back by 11 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
and one flyaway. So I've been gone 3 or 4 nights a month. And that really it's been that way since 2013. 2011 and 12, I really did nothing. There was no work. Neither of them were touring. I was, grinding, man. I was putting on a tuxedo and playing corporate gigs around New York for, nearly 15 months. Good for my playing, good for my ear, played with great musicians. So it's really been, quite some time since I've had to do the long bus tour kind of thing,
Yeah.
It's really manageable the way we tour with Billy now, although the garden's over, so it's 2 flyaways a month. So I'm gone between 6 and 8 nights a month. Well, my kids are grown. My kids are in college here in the States. One's, they both live out of home now. So,
yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's not possible. I mean, no, not delving into your private life too far, of course, like I mentioned, but is it possible for you to live in Australia, or is your life so entrenched in New York these days that's home?
With the amount of money that university and college costs over here, I suggested we go back for 5 years, and I would have done the commute 2 weeks in Australia, 2 weeks over here. It's not practical at the moment. My wife is a university professor, a researcher. She's the vice dean of a school of public health. She's got a very demanding job herself.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it's not feasible. We got to work out, see what happens with our daughters when they finish college. One finishes in May, so there's about to be a big change there. It probably, while I'm still doing this, it probably doesn't make sense. Having said that, I did suggest that we have a term over here in New York, especially where we call retired folks snowbirds. So during the winter months, they have another smaller place down in Florida. They go down there for the freeze and come back when spring happens up here. So my suggestion was, what about if we get a place on the sunny coast up in Noosa, and little place, and downsize, sell this house here, get something smaller, get something out there, do the snowbirding out in Australia for 5 months, and then come back here for 7 months, depending on where our daughters end up, etc. So, that's my dream. I mean, I sincerely mean it. I miss home every day, and this last trip was really hard for me to come back. I left my wife and daughters in Adelaide. They stayed on with my family. I had to come back to do a New Year's Eve show. So coming back to an empty house, albeit the fur baby, the dog, was kind of like, it was tough.
You've accumulated a lot of knowledge, but more so experience. And I'm sure you've been asked about this or approached about this, but a biography or something that captures a lot of your memories and your experience, whatever that instrument might be. It might be a series of conversations that you have where it's mapped out over a YouTube scenario. But even better, I'm a writer, you see, and I've ghostwritten musicians' biographies, and they're always fascinating and insightful. But have you got plans on something that captures your experience and then shares that?
No, I think I've been privy to something that's a lot of those things. It's either going to be a dig me, or it's going to be a spilling the beans on things that happened. And I'm not going to be that guy. It might be because it's a bass player mentality of like, I'm happy standing up the back, sitting on the hi-hat, doing my thing. And I wouldn't do that. People, even some of the guys in Billy's band, like, but your story from Adelaide to Sydney to like, I just was born in another place. You guys have all done the same thing. Have had the same challenges. It's just that New Jersey's on the doorstep of New York, or you grew up in LA. There were more opportunities, perhaps. But I wouldn't, and I no. There's been enough people that have done that. It's kind of, and I don't mean this to sound vain, but at our level, my level, it's kind of the same story for most of us. Yeah. I'm a side man. I'm a touring guy. I'm I'm a competent musician. I'm not an a-hole, which is one of the biggest parts of what we do. And I'm going to quote Tommy Burns, Billy's guitar player. I've said this before too in other interviews, but it's worth remembering. Tommy in his big Long Island thick drawls, like, look, when you're starting this business, it's 80% how you play, 10% how you look because you're young and gorgeous, and 10% getting along. When you've been doing it as long as we've been freaking doing it, everyone figures you can play. So it's 10% how you play, 10% keeping your aging bones in some kind of shape, and 80% getting along, because no one wants to spend 2 years on a freaking tour bus with a freaking a-hole. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
So if you've got the ego and the, like, wow, aren't I special? You're going to bore your bandmates to death, because we're all there. And can I tell you that it goes for the artists as well, the guys that hire us. The guys that are at the very top are always still the best guys. My boss, Sting. We've been doing lots of gigs with Sting. He's great. Rod Stewart, Stevie Nicks, all those, McCartney, like Brian John, all those guys are great dudes. And they don't see themselves above everybody else. They see themselves as musicians. Billy sees himself as the piano player in his band, which is ridiculous, but he loves being in his band, and that's really what it's about.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just inspired to ask the question about capturing your experience, because, I mean, you appreciate this. I didn't have your academic. I'm a journalist by trade. I went to Bond and became a journalist there, and but I wasn't. I can read music, but only after a period of time. And I think a lot of people are in my position where they can play, but reading music is something a bit different. So I don't have the academic approach. So straight away, when I was a young fella, it was playing music for you is never going to be a career, that type of thing. But there's a lot that people who give that advice to young people that don't know that you know, and that people adjacent to you know very well, which is that exactly as you've articulated, be easy to get along with. Like, I can tell you for a fact, mate, that even in the covers scene, okay, I play with David from the Porkers and a few other bands who come in and out of our band and do stuff. These guys are players, no doubt. But, they're better guys than they are players. Meaning we just talk about the football scores in our break and what our kids are up to or what have you. I think you can relate to that. As soon as the guy comes off stage and he's looking at your gear, I know, oh, shit, that guy's, he's going to start punishing about string gauges or something like that, and it's going to get weird. And, yeah, but, but you get these people who do, they go, oh, Gary Kruger or David Eden or whatever, and you're like, oh, please don't go there. Just, they're all good. They all do their own thing. Can we just not talk about it, please? It's just let's just get on with our lives and talk about whether the Tigers are winning or not, or the Broncos are winning, whatever it might be, whatever it might be. But I guess just to round out my point, I think that you're somebody that people can look up to if they are 15 and 16 and they're starting out and they've really got that deep passion that clearly you and I have. But you're the one guy from a very similar situation to me and a lot of other young people growing up in Australia. You're the one guy that figured out how the solution to the problem, if you understand what I'm saying, which seems to come down to, being a player, but being very easy to get along with as well.
Why didn't you pursue it professionally? I'm putting you on the spot. I mean, because it's scary. It's really scary. I was scared when I was 21, When I finally made the decision to give it a shot, I had this great job. I was a research assistant in marine biology in the University of Adelaide. I was a scuba diving guy. I had a great job. My parents couldn't believe it when I told them I was quitting, especially when I held up the Scarred for Life album cover. And they're like, oh, my God, you're going to... Can you imagine? And think about that. I'm gonna quit my job in marine biology and move to Sydney and join this band. And and in the lean times in between gigs, it was scary. I mean, before I got the Shania Twain job, I was credit cards maxed out. I was freaking out, and I was going to come home after a year and go back to school. So it's scary. And when you're on a nice solid thing and you've been to school like I did for my parents, taking that leap of faith is hard. And then, I didn't want to leave Australia. I mean, I remember flying out the day I left to come to New York, and the plane circling over Sydney Harbour and looking out of the window and going, oh my God, it's just this beautiful, beautiful, like autumn day. Sun was out. I'm like, look at this city. I love living in Sydney, And I land in New York and it's a grey, cold day, and I'm, sleeping on my buddy's couch in a little tiny studio apartment. And I'm like, what have I done? It's hard. It's hard to leave, and it's hard to have the confidence to think. I mean, the first weekend I'm in New York City, I'm walking along Bleecker Street at all these little bars going to see different bands playing, and I'm hearing bass players that blow me out of the water, technically. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Oh my, what am I thinking, But then you realize that you've got some of the attributes that you mentioned earlier in the interview, You're good with songs. You're good with contributing to a song, to the song structure. That you can sing. I can sing, which helps a lot. That I like to think of myself as a selfless musician. Serve the song, play the low notes, play them in time with a drummer. Don't let the bass line step on top of the lead vocal. Basic, tenets of how to play pop songs and rock songs. And so you find your niche, and people realize that, and it's to be a team player, you've got to have that kind of sense of humility and realize you're serving a bigger thing, which is the tune, the song itself. And that's what I've always wanted to do. So, but leaving home, be it Adelaide or Sydney, and leaving your friends and leaving your family, it broke my heart. I spent my time in Adelaide with my sister, my mother, the kid I grew up next door that I've known since he was born, and the kid across the street. Michael Hutton and Hardy Koziol, born next to me. I've known them all my life. I was best man at both their weddings, and I miss them every day.
There you go.
Not easy.
Yeah. It does come down to, there's something ethereal, if I can use that term, about sacrifice and what you're willing to sacrifice and what you get in return from that. And I think you've just articulated that.
I hope so. I mean, again, as I say, I consider myself so lucky. I've got a beautiful family. I've got a nice house. I get to play great music with fantastic musicians. Poor me. Don't take it the wrong way. I get to tour the world, stay in nice hotels. It's great. But it doesn't mean it was hard leaving my life back in Australia,
Yeah, and I think people have got to keep that in mind, that there's a decade or so in between that, where 5 years, a decade where nothing's a given, nothing's certain, and it is full of uncertainty. And you're what did Al Anderson from Bob Marley's band say to me? He said, you're eking it out or you're grooving it out or what have you anyway. But he says after a while it just starts, the overnight success. But really it's all those years leading up to that gives you the opportunity. And to your point earlier, you learn all of these songs from Cream and Led Zeppelin and Hendrix. So as though when the opportunity did come up, bang, you just went. But if you didn't prepare in that way and you weren't ready and, you'd forgone, getting pissed the night before in order to learn 3 or 4 songs that there's a 1% chance that you might have had to play. If you didn't do that, you wouldn't have all of this wonderful road open up before you.
Right. There's no way you can approach, someone's going to pay you to do your job.
Yeah.
And it's their money. Billy Joel pays me. Okay, he makes a lot of money, but Billy Joel pays me out of his pocket, as did James Reyne, as did Angry Anderson, as did every band I've ever played with. It's like, I'm going to show up knowing my stuff because, you are providing me a living doing what I love. And the least I can do is have my stuff together for you, have my shit together for you,
Mate, I'll make this my final question for you. Obviously, you've got the hard rock project coming up. I'd love to. I can't wait to hear that actually after this chat. But what else is on the horizon? And the key, I love asking this last question because I always ask, what do you hope happens next?
I hope that Billy, who just is 75, will turn 76 in in May. I really think we've got another couple of years at least. He's still singing great. He's still playing great. And he's the first one to say, if I can't bring it, we're done. Luckily, he's still bringing it. He really is. It's incredible. So I hope that goes on for many years. I don't know realistically how long that will be with him. I have already recorded, 11 sort of backing tracks for this record I'm making. I really like it. And that's really what it's all about for me. I've got to like it. I'm not trying, at my age, I'm not trying to impress anyone anymore. I want to be able to sit back, actually put the CD in the car and crank it and go like, yeah, I really, really like that. So far I do. So that's the me thing. I say it's, for the 300 expa mulleted and the women that love us, the old mullets, although the mullets are back.
Yes.
And I will keep writing. And I think what we spoke about before is people not having the opportunity to get this stuff out into the wider world. Well, that's changed a bit now with Spotify and stuff like that. So I will continue to write. I've kind of, maybe the next one will be a bluesier kind of thing. Yeah. I've got I should take the background off and show you what the nonsense I've got here. I'll send you a photo.
Cool.
Maybe a record like that. And then I've stalled it for many years. I've got a piano album that I started working on about 10 years ago and then just stopped because the rock thing was tap me on the shoulder all the time. So
yeah,
I'm just going to keep writing and keep throwing stuff out there and hopefully keep touring. And if Billy hangs it up, I'll be looking for something else because I don't want to stop. But there's no sign of that happening whatsoever. I mean, we just I believe they've got dates going into 26 already. Just this summer, he just announced Giant Stadium. It's called something else these days. I can't think where the New York Giants play out in New Jersey. MetLife. Thank you very much. And we just yesterday announced Yankee Stadium 2 weeks later. So, that's all in the New York area and all, big stadium shows. So I don't want that to end. I'm happy to keep on rolling and, take a couple of strokes off my golf handicap and keep listening to great rock and great music.
Well, I think, as I say, I certainly speak. When I say this, I think I speak for all working Australian musicians to say we're incredibly, we admire your accomplishments. Dare I say it, we're proud that one of us is doing what you've been able to do. A full-on, no bullshit musician has been able to accomplish what you have, and long may you continue to do what you do.
Thanks, Andrew. It means a lot. And again, this stuff sometimes doesn't sit easy with me, but I appreciate it, and it's been really nice to chat with you. And I know that while I'm not kind of in your main genre of interest anymore, my heart still lives there.
No dramas. Honestly, one of the key reasons that I really wanted to get you on the show was I'm not resetting the show, but conversations with musicians is really what the show's all about. And working musician. The key term here is working musicians, people who are actually doing it like I'm doing it. Albeit on the stages of the Gold Coast, Brisbane and Sunshine Coast and far western Queensland or whatever else. But, you're doing it at the level that I think we can aspire to and just find, when I say common ground, I'm nowhere near your accomplishments, but it's just great to know that, that this opportunity can be made available, to have a chat with you and to share your story with people that can then get inspired. And I mean, the fact is most of my audience is in the USA and Britain as well. But I also wanted to give them some insight into the Australian angle on this, that, if you come from England or the USA, it's fairly, I'm not saying it's easy because it's never easy, but the probability of you being able to make it is probably 100 times more what it is if you come from Australia. But you're the one bloke who, as I say, figured out how to solve that Rubik's Cube, and you're doing it and you've done it. And it's great to get that insight. And so I know my mate Dennis Gray's had a good chat to you as well. So I think between his chat, the Australian Rock Show, and I think between his chat and this one here, it really sort of lays it all out for people in a way that the musician can understand.
Thank you. Don't forget too, and I also mentioned this when I just got inducted a few weeks ago in South Australia, that what we do have in Australia, which many other people did not have the opportunity to do was to play, especially up until the mid-late 90s, where in Adelaide, I grew up as a teenager playing 4 or 5 nights a week. From the moment I moved to Sydney, right until when I left, I played 6 nights a week, 45 weeks a year. And Mutt Lang was the first person that came to me at my audition and said, "You Aussies play differently. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the way you play." And I put it down to that. I put it down to being match fit for spending so many years on the road. And so when you're out in Roma or, up in Maroochydore or wherever you are, and you're banging it out 4 or 5 nights a week, that's what makes you match fit. You can spend a lifetime in a rehearsal studio, but getting out there and doing it is what, gives you the foundation then to jump on the springboard and go to, spread your wings and move further afield. That's what I think held me in good stead.
Yeah, and literally those two places you mentioned, I was at Roma last year and Stanthorpe as well. So, but this is what it takes. You've got to be out there on a stage. I like to say, especially when I play that Shania stuff that you've played thousands of times, no doubt, but you see the joy that it gives to people, the radiating joy from the dance floor, and people lead hard lives. People are. There's a lot of issues around the cost of living and inflation, all this sort of shit that people have to contend with these days. You're literally on stage for the 1 or 2 hours where it's a bit of a sedative, isn't it? When you look out into that crowd. Yeah.
To quote my boss, to forget about life for a while.
Yeah.
In Piano Man, I saw a little 14-year-old girl the other night at a show from Long Island. We were playing at Madison Square Garden, and we were doing a song called The Downeaster Alexa, which is a song about the fisherman's plight in Long Island. The Long Island fishermen who, no fish, can't do this, can't do that, fish are gone, whatever, hard to make a living. This kid was emoting every single lyric. And I went, man, this song means so much to her. So that, or just people like going, forget about all the stuff that's getting me down and just a release of emotion. It's great to be able to make people do that, to help them forget about life for a while if life is, tedious and tough.
Mate, from here, I'll, if you're comfortable, I'll just release the chat intact as it is. I think it's been a tremendous conversation, and I hope we can do it again sometime in the future, actually, after, a few more years down the track, and we can reflect on this chat and talk about what's happened in between.
I would look forward to that, Andrew. Absolutely. Been a pleasure, mate.
Well, there you have it. A conversation with the great Andy Cichon, a very worthy installment of the Scars and Guitars podcast, it must be said. I want to have more conversations like that. And on that note, I just want to thank my guitarist in my band, The Curve or Velvet Kiss, Mal Zigo. He works at Noosa Music because he helped facilitate the introduction to Andy. So I don't think it would have happened if he didn't pave the way in some way. So, and of course also too to Andy again for agreeing to the conversation. I'm very appreciative because this is certainly the direction that I'd like to take the show, or do more of this sort of deep diving with serious musicians whose resume is as deep and as comprehensive as what Andy's is. So if you're new to what it is that I do, welcome. Chances are you aren't, though, so you know what the show is all about. But just in case you aren't, go across to Scars and Guitars because many more conversations await. Not everything goes onto YouTube. Everything does go onto the podcast, but if you are tuning in via YouTube, about 60 to 70% of what it is that I do goes to YouTube, but unfortunately they're very censorious. So sometimes the conversations veer into the social and into the political, which means that I get community strikes. So to get around that, all of the episodes are easy to find at scarsandguitars.com. All right, that's it from me. My name's Andrew Mackay Smith. I'm the host of Scars and Guitars. Until the next one, it's a goodbye for now.